Ya lo hace. Pierna derecha, directo al arco. ¡Golazo! ¡Golazo!
The world of football with a soccer perspective. This is Soccer Today with Duane, Rollins and Kevin Laramee, live on the Sports Podcasting Network.
And good day, good night. Welcome to Soccer Today. Duane, never a dull moment covering Canadian soccer.
I would kill for some dull moments. Covering North American soccer as we do here, obviously. Someone made the joke on Twitter yesterday that the most functioning English-speaking FA within CONCACAF might be Belize right now. So there you go.
Go Belize.
Obviously, yeah. Well, yesterday there was news yesterday too with the U.S. men's national team losing a player out to Mexico as well. So we didn't even touch that. We're not going to touch that today. We might get to that a little bit later this week, but certainly we've got to continue to break down last night's frankly shocking news that John Herdman has left the Canadian women's national team to join the Canadian men's national team. And Xavier Zambrano is out as Canadian men's national team manager as well.
Kevin, last night, Duane, I was saying I was speechless. Turns out I'm not the only one.
Yeah, no, there's a lot of people that are confused by this, and there's a lot of takes flying around, and I, not many of them are positive. I spoke a lot. If you haven't heard it, we did a 15-minute show yesterday, just sort of initially reacting to the news, sort of a hot take special, I guess, if you want. It's still pretty hotty takey right now. It's pretty early in the day in the news, but I spoke a lot last night, so maybe we'll get you to expand a little bit more to start here. From your perspective, Kevin, I'll ask you directly. What do you think this means for the? Let's start with the men. We talked a lot about the women last night. Let's start with the men. What do you think this means for the men's program?
Well, it means that the Zambrano hire wasn't necessarily going well in one way, which for us it was hard to say because when we see games and just soccer, things were seeming to be in a better direction, seeming to be better. But then we learn a lot of things, or we just see things where they really are behind the scenes, where promises were not kept, work rate was not consistent. So you do have now a feeling where there's one thing John Herdman is going to do, is his work. There's one thing where he's not going to be outdone by anybody else, is trying to build relationship with different associations in Canada, with different municipalities, provinces, and getting those network and bridges to be built so you can have an exchange of tactics, of philosophy, of programs, standards, and even players and discovery and all that. So those bridges need to be rebuilt. We thought the foundation was there to rebuild those bridges, but apparently it wasn't. And John Herdman, if there's one thing he knows how to do, is build connections, networks, and I think he may be good for that, and he's going to get ready. He's going to try his best. So there's that aspect. The rest, we'll see. The experience side of John Herdman on the men's side is pretty limited, but you do see some part of success in early on in his career before he moved to the women's side. But it's still a big position if you're looking at a developed, rich, quote-unquote rich country, if you're looking at the grand scheme of things, and their national team program. It's a big task, and I don't know. I'm still wondering if the men's player will accept that move. And for the women's player, what I mentioned earlier when I said I'm not the only one being speechless is that tweet by Christine St. Clair directly replied to Canada Soccer saying, "I'm speechless right now." And I think that says it all.
Yeah, and look, it came out last night, some of the reporting that this was a widely known secret in the last month or so, that Zambrano was like,
we just lost Duane for a second. We'll get Duane on the line right now. And Duane should be joining us in a second. Duane, it seems the powers that be wanted to stop you from talking, so we got you back on the line.
There, I know, I got that. I don't know where I got cut off, but I said, well, we're going to have Sandor on to talk about his own article when we book him. But certainly some of the issues that we can talk about with Zambrano are the fact that he just wasn't doing the legwork to create the communications between particularly the technical directors across the country. And look, there's going to be some, and he put a tweet out himself. I don't know if everyone's seen it yet, but he did make a tweet in response to another one, which sort of implied that the problem was that others in the Canadian system weren't on board with what he wanted to do, and that it wasn't necessarily a case of him not doing the work, but rather, in his opinion, the people not being willing to do the work. And then he went on to thank the gracious people of Canada and the beautiful country and blah 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 blah. But
okay, let's go there for a second. When I read that tweet, and then you're looking at the article by Steven Sandor too, maybe you can't come into a place and change everything at the first opportunity, right? Of course, you're gonna find yourself with people not wanting to do that, and you're gonna find yourself in opposition and people fighting back because you can't change everything at once. You gotta come in. You gotta be like, all right, I know this is not the way it's supposed to be. I know other places they do things differently, but you're the one coming in here, so you kind of have to. Yeah, in your grand scheme, your grand plan, maybe your 10-year plan, you'll get there in 10 years, but you need to do baby steps, and you can't just come into the job and want to change the entire structure of everything in the first year.
Yeah, look, people that I've talked to on and off the record in the last few weeks have convinced me that it probably was, even though it's a bit of a ripping the Band-Aid off situation because the hire was so new, it was probably for the best. To part companies, even if you believe that Zambrano's vision was the correct way forward, the disconnect was the problem here, and the lack of communication was like a lot of players that should probably have been considered. In many ways, he, to use a comparison that our American listeners might understand, he sort of had the blinders on in much the same way that Klinsmann had with certain players within the system, and he wasn't even bothering to look at them, and that's more problematic than other aspects that are out there. And that's to say nothing of the rumored stuff too, which again, I mean, you can figure that out yourself if you want, but obviously they're not scoreboard related, as I said. So I think it probably was for the best for both parties that they parted ways. Herdman's side of it is the one that I still can't completely wrap my head around, and we are going to talk more about the women's side of the game in the second block. So, so fans listening there, don't worry, we're going to get back to you, but we'll focus on the men for now. As I said yesterday on the special show, I'm not entirely convinced this is a step up for the Canadian men's program. I'm not entirely convinced his skills, what he is best at, is going to translate in the same way to the men's game. Some of his sort of rah-rah stuff, I think, might get laughed at bluntly. But it was appealing on the women's side of the game. And that just goes to the differences in how you handle female athletes versus male athletes. And I think there is a difference, and it's silly to suggest otherwise. It's going to be a challenge for him. And as I said, the credibility issue is going to be his biggest one to match. In many ways, I look at this, and you're right, he's going to put the work in. Everyone who knows him, everyone who's dealt with him will say that he's a very bright person who works his ass off to get where he has gotten to in the game as a guy that never played it at a high level, like at a level at all, really, is remarkable and a testament to his tactical awareness, to his ability to do that homework, to run a good training session, to be modern in his outlook and his thinking, to bring sports science into the mix and things like that. But that's, all fine and dandy, but it's a different animal on the men's international side of things from what the women's international, which runs more like a club team in some ways. He had those players for 3-4 months at a time. They essentially were a club team. He was able to day in, day out work with them, able to establish that relationship. So he's getting these guys, they're fly-by, like they're drive-by right now, right? Like they're going to be flying in, they're going to have a 10-day camp, and then they're going to be gone back to their clubs again. He's not going to be able to do some of the stuff that he was so successful on the women's side. I almost think, Kevin, I'll let you jump in after this, that had this switch been made into Herdman taking over a national technical director role on the men's side of things, or universally across both genders, ideally, I would have been more on board for it. But I think his challenges are going to come on the managerial side of things, and I think it's incumbent upon him to get a experienced former player someone who has a former player with some managerial experience beside him to help him gain the respect and the ear of the players that he's going to be dealing with, some of which will quite bluntly dismiss his female accomplishments outright.
One thing I was reading, Duane, earlier today, and I think it's in Steven Senner's article. I might be mistaken because I read so many this morning, and it kind of all blends in while you're drinking your coffee. But one thing that was noted is the lack of experience on hostile environment to go play away. I'm saying a tough day in San Pedro Sula in Honduras. Those environments don't exist yet on the women's side. And you don't have fireworks at 3 a.m. in the morning to keep you up like in Panama or apparently like in Toronto. So you have that aspect of the game in the national team level, international level with Canada, example, in the qualification process. That won't happen during the Gold Cup. It won't happen during friendlies and other tournament. But when it truly matters to qualify for a World Cup, the hexagonal, if we actually can get there, or the third round of qualification, when you go away to Honduras, when you go to Panama, Trinidad and Tobago, those hostile environment where you don't necessarily have the cooperation of the other club to make sure your bus is on time, or that the plane is on time, or that things go well at security, or things you don't control. In this environment, the other FA usually doesn't necessarily help you, which is different to what we're used to in even on the women's side or on the club side here in Canada and North America. It is all professional. It's done in the right way. You know your bus is going to be there when the plane lands. It's not necessarily the case on the international level in a World Cup qualification when the other team will do all that it can to get that edge over you. And I think that experience, that lack of experience for Herdman with a national team could be important, especially the first go around. And then maybe we get a automatic buy-in for 2026. But for 2022, that lack of experience of managing an international team in hostile environment, that could be important.
No, for sure. I tweeted about that last night a little bit too. There's several things that aren't necessarily directly game related that he doesn't have experience in at all. The women have never, let's face it, they've never really had to qualify in a real way. Obviously, they have to go through a qualifying process, but it's a process in which it's a rubber stamp in so many ways. I mean, I guess the closest thing that they've had to a high-pressure qualification game in his entire time in charge was the game against Mexico in the 2011, the game against Mexico that took place at BC Place, where had they lost, they wouldn't have qualified for the Olympics. That, to me, is the closest thing that they've had to a high-pressure qualifying game. They automatically got in 2015. The previous World Cup, it wasn't really a sweating situation. That's the one that the Americans faltered. So they pretty much had a give me there, a 2-foot putt type thing to make it into the World Cup. The men are a different animal altogether. As you said, he's never had to deal with a hostile environment. There's no hostile environments in the women's game at this point in time. Maybe you could say, the closest you're going to get to a hostile environment for the Canadian women's national team might be to play a game against the Americans somewhere, in a pretty partisan environment.
Yeah, I know what you mean. It's hostile during the game, but it's not like outside the actual game that it's important. It's the food that you're going to be cooked, right? You go to Honduras, close to the stadium in your hotel room that you're playing, and the cook that's making your food in the morning, well, he knows you're playing Honduras, and he's going to do whatever it can to mess up your eggs, so it mess up with your psyche. And that's why we have our own chef that goes down and make our own food so we don't get poisoned. So it's all those little details that a head, because he's not just manager. Let's put this straight. He's just not manager of the Canadian men's national team now. He's responsible for the program down up until U14. And I think that's important to note is he's going to mold the next generation. So that's why we're talking about it this much. And that's why it's a big, big move. And it's a move that's it's a bold move. We'll see if it's a right move down the road on either side, but it's a bold move.
No, for sure. And it's unprecedented, too.
Never happened before.
I cannot recall off the top of my head, and someone correct me out there if I'm wrong, where a high-profile women's coach has moved from the women's game to the men's game at this level, and
in the same country,
top 10,
like in the same country.
Yeah, well, especially even at all. I can't even think of other sports. There was a famous basketball coach, Pat Summerall, who was offered a job with the University of Tennessee to coach the men's team. She turned it down because she didn't want people to assume that it would be, quote unquote, a promotion to get to the men's game, and that's obviously this is not playing well in women's soccer Twitter right now.
We'll get there
because they feel it is a bit of a betrayal.
We'll get there after the break.
Okay, yeah.
Yeah. So exactly, let's take that break, and now try to understand after the break the importance of it on the women's side.
You are listening to Soccer Today. Follow us on Twitter at Soccer Today SPN and like our Facebook page, facebook.com/Sports Podcasting Network. You can find the podcast version of all the shows we do on iTunes, Apple Podcast, Google Play Store, TuneIn Radio, iHeartRadio, and anywhere you get your podcast.
And we're back on Soccer Today. Duane Rollins with myself, Kevin Laramee. On the women's side of things, what does it say, Duane? We talked about it last night and how we were wondering the reaction of certain players. I mentioned earlier the Christine St. Clair "I'm speechless right now" tweet. That's just, she's the biggest name ever in Canadian women's soccer, and she learned about it on Twitter. What does it say about that side and other reaction that I have seen, that you probably have seen from our acquaintances on social media that are taking this as an insult? And how are you supposed to explain to young girl players that you are as important as men when clearly this move shows that it might not be the case?
Yeah, I'm going to read a tweet that's been getting a little bit of traction. Someone sent me this. This is not my words, but this has been retweeted into my timeline quite a few times. This is obviously in reference to John Herdman and him, saying the CSA he would leave if they didn't give him the men's job. Is that, quote unquote. This was by a young woman by the name of Danelia Ladman, who wrote this originally. I'll get her Twitter handle in a second if I want. But anyway, it says, "Every time I'm offered a job at another place, I threaten my boss, saying that if they don't demote me, I'll leave." There's obviously a joke in there that the Canadian women are more successful than the Canadian men. And that is true, undoubtedly, even in context. But yeah, that's sort of the perception in the women's world right now, is that how can they possibly, they're leaving, the 5th ranked women's program in the world for the 96th ranked men's, and how can that be possible? What does that say about the relative importance of the men's game? Now, I will be charitable to John Herdman a little bit here and to say that I can understand a scenario in which he's not viewing this as a step in any direction other than a step in a new direction. And I think that is a way to think about this, where he's, it's a challenge for him. And I don't know how challenging coaching the Canadian women were at this particular time for him. I also believe, that now I'm going to be less charitable to John Herdman with this. He's an incredibly savvy guy. He's very media. He understands media. He knows how to cultivate relationships within the media. He knows how to keep good friends in good places. And he knows how to utilize what is, a charming, good-looking persona to his greatest advantage to get to the most benefit for himself. That there's nothing wrong with that. But it certainly, I think, can be viewed as him being able to, to utilize that fame and that sort of notoriety that he has to become the face of Canadian soccer and make himself get to the point where people on the Canadian Soccer Association Board of Directors felt that he was irreplaceable. Now, I disagree with that scenario. I think John Herdman is a fine coach. Obviously, been successful with the women, but I would have let him walk to England, bluntly, especially when he pulls the stuff like what he did. And I don't have a lot of time for the way that he manipulated this. Yes, Zambrano had to move on, but I would have much preferred them to just let him go and do a proper job search, because I just don't think that this is the right way to go about this. And as you say, we talked with the men in the last segment, there's a lot of issues there, but the other side of this, the women's side, is almost more damaging. They're speechless. And they're mad at the CSA right now. And most people are blaming the CSA, but I don't know whether John Herdman is getting enough blame for this because he orchestrated it. Yeah. He was the one that created this. And I don't get why he gets off scot-free again.
Oh, you mentioned personality, charisma goes a long way. But one thing that we're not talking about, here is the financial implication. Not just on the salary increase for John Herdman, Duane, but look at this in the big picture. Canada Soccer is actually saving a salary here. Because, I've talked about how we're a rich federation. We're not that rich, though. So saving a 6-figure salary a year makes actually a big difference in the budget. Zambrano out, German is transferred, and even if you give a substantial raise to Herdman and substantial raise to the new head coach of the Canadian women's national team, Robin, forget the Hassler. There's a middle name in there somewhere. I apologize for not having it in front of me. But you have even if you have pay raises there, you still have a salary saved here somewhere. So for the short term, it was a financial maybe solution as well to a problem of trying to get rid of Zambrano, fill some positions, but not necessarily add cost on top of it.
Yeah, I mean, Mueller is the coach of the women, but
he was already an assistant. He was already there as an assistant. You just up the salary. So in the short term, there's still a save here.
Yeah, it's they're not going to pay him as much as they paid Herdman. That's for sure. There will be some savings that way, but I do think that Herdman will get a significant increase in his base pay based on this move. So I don't know whether it washes or not, but for sure, this is part of it. And I think the other way to look at the money aspect of this, and this is, female fans that are frustrated, quite rightly, but are confused by it. There's your answer, folks. Like, it does pay more. Now, the Canadian Soccer Association has an equal pay for gender policy when it comes to the national teams. They have to pay, they are funded equally. But because the Canadian women are in camp more, they spend months in camp, residential camp. That is not cheap. They spend money on more. They play more games. They are not free to play, so they fly them around and things like that. So basically, a lot of the money that is earmarked for them goes to that infrastructure sort of side of things, and not as much is available for salaries. So that means that the women's national team coach is not paid because it's the same budget is coming out there and it's equally funded at the same level as the men. The men sacrifice on the amount of games they play and on, camp sizes and things like that, but the men's coach gets more money. So there is an advantage and a personal advantage for John Herdman to take this job here. And this goes beyond, and I do think that there probably is something to the idea that he is intrigued by the challenge of taking a program from a low point to something better. Now, there's an instinct within WOSO soccer circles sometimes to bash the men's game, and particularly among Canadian women's national team fans. True. There is a certain segment of them that feel that the way to support the women is to bash the men, and I find that dumb, bluntly. I don't think that's the way to do this. I don't think the Canadian men are as bad as some people like to point them out to be. They were fine in the Gold Cup this year. They obviously have struggled for many years, and there's many different reasons for that, but they're not quite the depths of the world's worst team or something like that. They're just a struggling national team, and they can turn it around in the same way. But a lot of the problems, a lot of the solutions, I should say, aren't going to come from a managerial change. They're going to come from systematic changes below, and in particular, the creation of a Canadian Premier League. And maybe that played a role in Herdman's decision as well, because I've also long made the argument, Kevin, I'll let you jump in after this, that as much as on the surface it seems like the Canadian women are a better, stronger program, but I think if you dig beneath that surface, there's more problems on the women's side of the game that in years to come are going to surface. And if the rest of the world continues at the pace it is in catching up to the industrialized nations that got in front of the women's game first, then Canada's going to be in trouble in a few years, and they're not going to be automatically qualifying for World Cups. And there's less professional structure out there on the women's side of the games, and that will be doubled down so if and when the Canadian Premier League ever gets its ass in gear, right?
Yeah,
so
no,
maybe
absolutely.
Herdman's looking at that as well.
I always say, Duane, and that is applicable to a few different sports in Canada, but that we're successful at international levels a lot of times despite of the way we develop players. Not because of how we develop players, but because of the amount of players we have, the pool and genes, and how our athletes are taller, bigger, stronger sometimes than other parts of the world, and that gets us by in a lot of sports sometimes. But in some other sports, we need better development. We can find a way to become Egypt, because we're no worse than Egypt, size-wise, amount of players, amount of possibilities for players, the amount of coaching staff, of resources. We can be Egypt. We can be Egypt. We just need to find our Mo Salah.
Sure. We can. Canada is every bit as big enough and has enough resources to qualify for a men's World Cup and to even hell win a women's World Cup one day for sure. But changes have to happen, and I guess that's where I really get frustrated by this. And maybe we'll talk a bit more about this in the final block, a little bit about what this means in terms of the Zambrano side of things and the Herdman side of things, and what this means in the CSA. Is that I am having trouble with this idea that Herdman has now been placed on this pedestal where he's almost untouchable. And I can't help but think that a big part of the CSA's decision to buckle to this threat has put him in a place where he's not going to be held accountable at the level that he should be. And he should be held accountable just like any manager. And in fact, now that he's made this choice, I almost think he should be held more accountable, because he has forced this decision to move to him. He put them in a position where, he's decided he wants to be the face. And with that amount of, responsibility becomes, consequences for that if he fails to succeed. And I'm not sure right now, especially if he signs a contract with the idea of going to 26, and I hope that they don't sign that long of a contract, but it would not shock me if they did. That's a lot of responsibility to give to someone, and clearly they are pretty enamored with this guy that they were this scared to lose him. I guess maybe they were going to lose him to a direct rival, which might have compounded that, but at the same time,
they already addressed 2026 in the statement yesterday in John Herdman's conference call, basically. Well, it wasn't a conference call. It was a call to CSA that was recorded, and then the CSA put out. But John Herdman did say, looking forward to 2022 with the possibilities for 2026 and being in the World Cup and all that. So I think it's, remember when we had those discussions, that bridge coaching? We had Floro as one of the bridges, and we had Zambrano, obviously, who was a bridge. And I guess Herdman is the guy for the long run.
Yeah, we'll see. And I mean, look, what happens if this doesn't work? Like, this is my question to the CSA. Like, if he struggles to get the respect of the men's players, do you have a plan B here? Or you're just basically going, John Herdman's my man? And I think maybe when you're looking at 26 as well, that this hire was made as much with the marketing side of things in mind. John Herdman did a great job at selling the hope of the World Cup, the Women's World Cup in 2050. And we had a lot of conversations where I was screaming under the sky about how the expectations were unrealistic.
Like, but stop, we're not going to win. Stop saying 1%. We're going to
win. 1%. And people are still mad at me over that. But the reality is it was true.
It was right,
and, obviously, I don't think he's going to try and sell the absurd idea that Canada could win the Men's World Cup, but he might sell the idea that we could get out of the group. And that probably is almost as absurd, right? So yeah.
We just need to get there. Never mind getting out of the group. We just need to score a goal, win a game. Never mind playoffs.
And look, and he's very good at that side of things. And when I look at the positives, we said we was going to talk about the women here, and we're still talking about the men, so I kind of feel bad about that. But the answer to the women is that there's a lot of problems out there. That this is the betrayed trust, the fact that it leaked before they were able to communicate the players. This is bad stuff. At a year of the World Cup, and there's a lot of work to be done there to regain that trust, and that's kind of the bottom line on that. But to get back to what I was saying before that, the positive that I can see that Herdman's going to bring to this from a men's perspective, from a men's fan perspective, is his ability to generate attention is going to be beneficial for the program and probably help that program land more sponsorships. And ultimately, I think his cult of personality will ensure that the Canadian men will play more and will be more in the consciousness of the average Canadian, because John Herdman has a big a Q factor, they call it, or whatever. He's a star. He's a star in an environment where there are no stars with Canadian soccer. I mean,
beautiful accent. dresses properly, got a nice haircut, has a beautiful accent, knows how to play the role, great mannerism. Like, he's a great, like, if I needed an actor to play a very good manager on TV, I would get him, right? He would totally do the case. Now it's just, does he have the substance that we think he does or doesn't? I don't know. And just saying that kind of hurts me too, because what does it say about the women's game as well, when we're wondering if he does have the substance, tactically speaking, and how to manage people? Because, well, yeah, you mentioned how it could be different last night, how to manage a group of men athletes versus a group of women's athletes. But people are people too. So I want to maybe think that maybe things are going to be okay, because he does have a people management skills. Obviously great, because he convinced Canadian Soccer Association that he's the man for the job. So I'm wondering how those skills do translate, and some of them do translate very well. And is it the same game? We're talking about the ball being kicked around and scored. The size of the score, the size of the net is the same. Size of the pitch is the same. You're playing 11 versus 11. The ball's round. Is it truly that different as well?
Yeah, well, I think when you get actually the game day, no, not so much. Tactics are important, but they're not the be-all, end-all, too. It's motivating players and getting the most performances out of them. I think where I'm struggling with this, just to belabor this again, we talked a little bit about his lack of experience going into hostile environments, but he also doesn't have experience like negotiating with clubs that are hostile to the idea of releasing their players to bloody Canada, right? The women's game, the women's club game is nowhere near the men's club game in terms of its popularity or power, and he could basically snap their fingers and go, come here. He doesn't have experience trying to convince reluctant players to play either. Playing for the Canadian women's national team is the pinnacle of the sport for a female player in this country. Playing for the men's national team is not the pinnacle of the sport in most people's minds. It's probably, for a young kid growing up right now, it'd be like playing for TFC would be a bigger dream for them than, or the Impact or the Whitecaps would be a bigger dream for them than the national team. And it's certainly, Europe is even above that. So he has to come
Duane,
stuff like that. Like, there's stuff that he just hasn't dealt with before.
It hurt what you just said. And you don't see it, but on the video, I'm wearing my England national team jersey today. And what you said is right. What have we done? We let it fall so deep under the radar that our kids don't even associate soccer and our national team as a goal, or as the pinnacle. It should be. That's what's important. And we let it fall to a point where no one actually truly cares, and it's club over country. We let it became that, and it's a sad realization this morning.
There are kids in this country that play the game that aren't aware that Canada has a men's national team. I mean, it sounds absurd, but legitimately, they're just not that tuned in. And I have had conversations with people that are legitimately surprised that Canada has a men's national team that plays games, because they've never heard of them. They don't see them on TV. They're not in their consciousness. They know Italy has a national team because their father is half Italian or something, but they don't associate Canada with even having a team, let alone a team that they would aspire to play for. There's a lot of work to be done to change that, and I think that is the one area where Herdman really can have a benefit on the program, is that visibility side of things, because he is damn good at that aspect of what he does. We'll see. I mean, you have to give him a chance, but we obviously have to give him a chance. He's got the job. I have concerns. I think that he deserves to be looked at critically with how this went down, although there's no way in hell that the CSA is ever going to admit that this is how it went down. But trust me, I've got more confirmation overnight from others that my reporting was pretty much spot on. So it's not tooting my own hat. That's just underlining that this is how it went down. There's a lot going on here, a lot of pieces, and maybe we should take a quick break now, Kevin, and end with talking a little bit about the Zambrano side of things a little bit more. Speechless, right?
You are listening to Soccer Today. Follow us on Twitter at SoccerTodaySPN and like our Facebook page, facebook.com/Sports Podcasting Network.
And we're back, Duane. Zambrano, on Zambrano's side. He said he's going to have a press conference in the near future to explain what actually happened. And that was when he was quoting a tweet. I know we report a lot on sometimes on what happens on Twitter, and not necessarily. I view Twitter as the people's billboard, and you have to take it for what it is. But Zambrano literally just retweeting a tweet that says nice things about him, saying, "Yeah, this is the most accurate things I heard saying about me when I've been dismissed, and I will have a press conference in the near future, and thanks for the opportunity," basically. But what does it say for Zambrano? Did he sell us clouds, and did we figure it out? Was he a vacuum salesman? Did he come here with big promises and never followed up? Was he trying to build a monorail and actually trying to kill us?
Maybe, yeah. Sheldonburg or whatever. What are those cities in the monorail? I'm forgetting my Simpson reference.
Me too, but North Pembroke, I think. Yeah, I think that's it.
Something like that. Yeah, it's a famous Simpsons clip, obviously. But look, yeah, I think that if you looked at his resume and sort of the gaps that are in it, they now make sense. And in some ways, it's similar hire to Floro in the sense that it's the guy that sort of seemed on paper like the right fit. But when you looked at it a little closer, you might think that I don't think Floro had the same problems as Zambrano seemed to have here, but certainly maybe it was a guy that there was a reason that he was available to a country like Canada, right? Using that kind of logic, it then stands to reason that maybe it would have been pointless to have another job search if John Herdman is really the best candidate that you can find for this. And look, that's the blunt reality. John Herdman might have been the best candidate they could get for the Canadian men's national team job. They've done, what confidence do we have in the CSA that they're going to pick the right guy? Because
they haven't the last two times. And before Floro, we had Stephen Hart twice before with a stint in the middle of, I'm going blank now. I'm drawing blank.
Well, they tripped into Stephen Hart, too. I mean, basically, they forced his hand with some decent results off the top, and he was another guy that was in-house. So, and then before that, you're talking about Dale Mitchell. And Dale Mitchell was a bloody disaster. So the CSA has not done well on the coaching front. Holger might have been the last good hire that they made. And he eventually, wore thin. He has a short shelf life anywhere. And I don't think Holger would be the right pick in today's era because he's a little too blunt and old-fashioned. But, leave the rest of that to your imagination. But yeah, they have not had a great hire record when it comes to the Canadian men's national team head coach. They've either gone old boys network or they've tried to go in-house and sort of, because they're Canada, they don't have a position of strength, so they have to sort of hire guys with warts. And some of those guys with warts, sometimes the warts spread, and I think that's maybe what's happened here. And I think that.
Oh, I was going to say, Duane, let's not forget, Steven Sandor mentioned as well, that MDS, Mark Dos Santos, was not contacted. It's been talked a lot since last night. Well, why do we get like a Mark Dos Santos? I probably don't even think that Mark Dos Santos sort of wanted the job at this point of his career, but he wasn't contacted. And I have a gut feeling that probably nobody else was contact, whatever that word is. Nobody else was called. Nobody else was called for this job. So, yeah, take it for what it is. So,
there's no doubt about that. There was no job search here. This was John Herdman, successfully playing the Canadian Soccer Association Board of Directors. Give me this job or I'm quitting. I'm moving to England. And I would wonder whether he wants to go to England. And that's I know that we got a lot of attention from English female soccer fans about this. I don't think John Herdman wants the England job. I think John Herdman is happy to have England interested in him and likes to cultivate that idea that he could jump there at any time. It certainly helped him financially, I think. But I don't think he wants the pressure that would go behind that or the attention. He's not going to have the same length of rope if he goes anywhere else in the world right now than he does here. This is extraordinary. He is like, in many ways, the best analogy I can come down to how the CSA is treating John Herdman right now is that he's like a college coach in the States that has, been in the same program for years and is basically an institution. You know how like you hear these stories of the highest paid state employee in certain states as a men's football coach.
30 out of the 50 states, the highest paid state employee is the coach of the football team.
Yeah, exactly. And that's what this is to me. This is a cult of personality that has become bigger than the program. John Herdman, as I was saying in the last segment, John Herdman is the most famous person, other than Christian Sinclair, in all of Canadian soccer. And he's by far the most famous male player in Canadian soccer now.
He never played a game for Canada, and he's the most famous one.
Yeah, I mean, in terms of national team, I mean, you can make arguments that, Altidore or Javinko or Bradley or whoever would be more famous overall, but certainly in terms of the Canadian national teams, he's the second biggest face and the biggest face now on the men's side. So that's what he is, and there's a lot of leash with that. And a lot of job security that he simply is not going to get anywhere else. And he certainly wouldn't get in England. And England's got its own problems to deal with right now, too, with the fallout of that. So, look, it wasn't – I think that John Herdman is quite savvy in how he's utilizing, this job offer that he got from England. And if you're England, it's got to be a little frustrating, too, if you're an English female fan, because – basically, they put all their eggs in trying to get Herdman over, from what I can tell, and then he, I think, used them. And now they're scrambling to find someone to take a program over that has, like I said, some problems of its own.
We'll see what comes of all of this. Never a dull moment, once again, covering the beautiful game in our beautiful country. There's always something happening, and we're going to follow this situation closely in the next few days as well.
No, for sure. Real quickly, I put a poll out yesterday just to give you a little update on that, to asking people what they thought, whether they thought John Herdman would be successful in his new role. 72% of the respondents so far have said that he will either be neutral in the sense that the program will just kind of be the same, or he will be a failure. 72% have either gone with the negative side of this response. So
it's a decent size of a poll. It's like a 600 votes and something. So we're not talking about just 5 guys voting.
Yeah, I think that's probably a reflection of the type of people that follow me. But if you were to ask a general soccer fan out there, they'd probably be positive about the hire because they know who John Herdman is and they've seen him be successful with the women. But
are you saying you have a cynical audience?
I have a very cynical and very also an audience that is predominantly follows the game at a level that is more intense, we'll say, than general.
Let's call him savvy.
So
let's call our audience savvy, and that describes it well.
Yes, we're a bunch of soccer geeks, is what we are. But nonetheless, so there is some doubt about this. And look, it's eroding confidence. The CSA always is going to struggle to get people's confidence, and they've done boneheaded things in the past. I believe that they are improving a great deal, and there are good things happening at the CSA, and we're not, the whole sack the CSA default that people go to is not always productive. But this is really hard to defend. It seems like a panic move, and it seems like a move where they were played a little bit, and that's problematic. And that's where I will criticize them here. My hot take, my initial reaction is leaning negative too. I don't know if this is going to work. As I said, can see some positives he's going to bring on the marketing side, on the sort of politics, internal politics side. I think he's going to have more power to get the men higher profile. But in terms of the actual soccer side and those inexperienced questions that I have, man, I would have been happier if they'd hired him as the TD. And I guess maybe that's my final thought on this. We'll wait and see how he does on the management side.
We'll wait and see.
But yeah,
who he chooses to surround him to, and I think that's an important situation. I think if he surrounds himself with, we were saying the word experienced a lot today, but maybe an experienced international level coach, maybe a few assistant that he trusts as well, and a mix of the old and the new can create a good environment. We'll see.
It's possible that he could hire a head coach too, as someone who does more directly day-to-day training and managing of the team at game day, and act as more of a general manager of the program. That's a possibility that John Herdman may choose to take here, that he may recognize his particular challenges on the men's side of things. We don't know exactly how he's going to approach the role. We know how he approached the role on the women's side, and that's obviously going to be missed a great deal. But we don't know what he's going to do in the men's side. I don't think that's what he's going to do, because I think John Herdman has a pretty healthy ego, and he wants to prove that he can manage on a men's team. But yeah, there's lots of ways that this can play out still. So we'll have to wait and see. And unfortunately,
the one positive thing, Duane, that I'm seeing is how often did we say, and you even mentioned it earlier today, how we don't necessarily have the big hand of stick when we're negotiating for coaches, because big coaches don't necessarily want to come here to coach and coach our national team to success, and couldn't really care less. This time around, this one. And yeah, so just forget the women's side. And it's unfortunate that he had to leave the women's side to do this. And it's a shame that maybe in his mind, he sees it as a promotion. Is it a side move? Is it a foreign move? I'm not saying this at all. I'm just saying I'm just pure on the sport level on the national team to better the national team. This coach wants that job to prove himself. He's going to do what is needed. The work rate, the hours, the long hours on the phone trying to reach players and trying to make sure we don't have a Jonathan Gonzalez here in Canada, to make sure that the junior Orlets do choose Canada like Junior did. And I think maybe that motivation that was maybe lacking what other coaches that the Canadian national team had, that will be the case. He will have that, John Herdman. So at least I'm comforted knowing that he has the job and he wants that job, not just because he needs that job.
Yeah, well, something to be said. It would be in the face of something in a country, and certainly John Herdman has set himself up there. I wonder what his he's still relatively young, that he might be looking at an opportunity beyond this, and if he's, maybe he wants to move into the men's game. Maybe he wants to move into the club side of the game, and after this stint, you never know. There could be things like that. But yeah, this has been a bizarre 24 hours in Canadian soccer for sure. And I can't wait for this Breno press conference.
Yeah, unexpected 13 hours of craziness in Canadian soccer. 2 special shows, and you can follow as well all our social media coverage as well on this issue at 24th Minute for Duane, at Kev Laramee for myself. Thanks for listening. We have a lot more live listeners today, and it's probably due to our special show last night. Thanks to everyone who took the time to listen to us today. You can give us a pat on the back, a little thank you, and the way you can do this is on patreon.com. We do this on our own time, and with your help we can actually have more time. We can actually feel rewarded and help to be more creative and bring you more in-depth coverage. We can make our phones go a little longer. We can reach a little further in the world of our networks of contacts in North American soccer, Canadian soccer, to get you coverage like we did last night and today. And with this, you can go to patreon.com/sportspodcasting network. $1 a month. That's all we're saying. You like the show, you listen to us daily, and the way you can help us is with patreon.com/sportspodcasting network. We thank the Dino, Don, Chris, Isaac. We have Dan, a bunch of supporters on patreon.com, and thank you all for your support over the years. And as always, until tomorrow, have a great soccer.
You can find the podcast version of all the shows we do on iTunes, Apple Podcast, Google Play Store, TuneIn Radio, iHeartRadio, and anywhere you get your podcast.